So if you've stepped away from Twitter for a day, maybe you were at work or at school or something and have just logged back on to the internet, we've got some catching up to do. A lot has happened in this past little over 24 hours or so I figured I'd make a video just kind of quickly breaking down all of these huge events that happened on the day of the franchise tag deadline. In my opinion, the biggest news is the Russell Wilson trade. Russell Wilson is a Denver Bronco. It's just kind of a crazy situation, and I was just thinking, like, I don't think this has ever happened before, right? Where a star quarterback gets traded to another team. I mean, I guess you could make the argument of a Stafford situation, but I do feel like the difference between Wilson and Stafford historically has been bigger. This is his chart of his what is called the PFF wins above replacement. It's a good stat to look at, and you see that over the course of his career, especially kind of since 2015 or so, he's for the most part averaged over 3 wins giving his team. So the difference between a just average season, so think about just the guy you would sign off the street to starting quarterback, and Wilson is typically worth around 3 wins. Instead, they trade away Russell Wilson, the Seahawks did, and the Broncos gladly pick him up. And you're getting 2 first-rounders, 2 second-rounders, and a couple of players. But you think about the way that it works, if you're trying to replace that 3-win mark, which it has been more, in 2019 it was 4.6, which is just an insane season to have. But let's just put it at 3. The way that you're going to have to make up that value of other players is going to be tough. Like, a star player at a different position will typically, unless they're like a superstar wide receiver, typically a great player will get you about half of a win. So are you going to get 6 great players out of this trade? Probably not. So that means that I think that just that alone, you got to figure like, hey, the Broncos are coming out ahead here. That's what I think. The other news that happened today, Aaron Rodgers is going to remain a Green Bay Packer, which I think makes sense. It's a situation he knows. It's a good situation. All these other situations, there's something wrong with it. You think about Denver, obviously playing a tough division, and then these other teams I think that he would go to would be like a significant drop-off from the Green Bay Packers. And also worth mentioning, he was still under contract. There's some weird stuff with that contract where Rodgers has come out and said that he did not sign a new deal. Rappaport originally reported that he signed a 4-year, $200 million deal, so now that's, I guess, in question. So that's weird. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to work. But regardless, there will probably have to be some sort of just restructuring of a contract just to make the cap space work because they also tagged Devontae Adams, which we will get into in a second. This is another big story. This was from yesterday, but Calvin Ridley is suspended for an entire year. And we've saw some weird arguments on Twitter. I don't know how much everyone pays attention to that stuff, but a lot of people saying, well, how is it fair that, people that commit domestic violence only get like a few games suspension, but Ridley got a whole year? To me, I think that the obvious answer is a suspension in the NFL has never been strictly an ethics statement. They're not suspending Ridley because they think that he did something so ethically wrong he deserves to sit out for a year. They're suspending him just because they don't want to even have to come close to considering having a player that maybe did bet on games or maybe had some insider information. The same thing would happen if you work at, in the stock market. If you have insider information or even connected with insider information, you can't make certain trades. To me, it's the similar mindset. So I think it's the right decision by the NFL. We can sit here and say maybe other suspensions should be harsher, but I don't think this one is too harsh necessarily. That's my mindset on it. I think that I'd rather, if I'm Roger Goodell, I'd rather come down hard on Ridley than too soft on him and allow other players to potentially, potentially do something that actually is underhanded. Because I don't think Ridley did anything ethically wrong necessarily, but it's not an ethics argument in my opinion. But I do get that people disagree about that. As for the franchise tags, so these are the players that were tagged. You have Cam Robinson, one of 2 players that got tagged for the 2nd straight season. So just in case you're curious how that exactly works, you can get tagged for the 2nd year in a row. It basically just what happens is it goes up by, it's 120% of what you made last year is the way to think about it. So if the tag was 10 million, then the next year it becomes 12 million. And speaking of that, Dalton Schultz, who gets franchise tagged for a little over 10 million, the tight end franchise tag, very cheap, which is why we saw some tight ends here. You also have Orlando Brown on this list. He is someone who, for the Kansas City Chiefs, it makes sense. I mean, if they let him walk, they'd start to be in trouble a little bit. You may made the trade in the first place because you know what you're getting with Orlando Brown Jr. He played well last year in a different system, so making sure you keep him on the roster, of course, makes sense. Jesse Bates, again, we got a safety here as well. Safety, also the tag is a little bit lower because, again, the way the tag works, if you're unsure about that, it's the average of the top 5 paid players at that position. That's how that tag works. So that's why, it's a little bit less money to tag Jesse Bates than it would be to tag a quarterback, for example. You also have guys like, you have David Njoku and Mike Gesicki, also guys who, again, are good players, and I think it makes sense to keep them. They're interesting with both of them, though, because Njoku is someone who, okay, maybe he's not this star player. You could argue that you haven't been using him properly, but you don't have to pay him that much for the franchise tag for tight ends, so it's kind of worth it. Mike Gesicki is another interesting aspect here where there's going to be some sort of debate of should he be tagged as a tight end, but I think what's going to end up getting held against him is we all consider him a tight end. He's a tight end in fantasy football, right? So he might try to sue and see if he can get more money out of it, but at the end of the day, I think that he'll probably end up being considered a tight end. That is what we all view him as. Also, the two big ones, the two big receivers, Devontae Adams and Chris Godwin, franchise tagged as well. We had a feeling this would happen with Adams, especially because he is someone who, the Packers just weren't going to let him walk, especially when they keep Aaron Rodgers and they're trying to compete. He's going to stay. Chris Godwin, an interesting one. I'm very happy as a Buccaneers fan that he's hanging around because he's obviously a very good player. Another guy getting tagged for the second straight year, but that's, again, you can do that. You can, from a football perspective, there's no harm in doing that, especially when the reality is a guy like Godwin, everyone's going to try and sign. Or at least you're going to check and see how much the price tag is because he can fit in any system. So making sure he stays on the roster, smart move there. And finally, Mike Williams, I put at the bottom. He didn't get tagged necessarily, but he did get an extension. We thought he might get tagged. Instead, he gets 3 years, $60 million. So decent amount of money for Mike Williams. Not that much higher for a 1-year cap hit than if he was franchise tagged. So maybe that's part of it is hey, if you can live up to your potential, well, then we'll keep giving you this much money. And if not, well, then I don't know how much is guaranteed and how much isn't. I haven't seen that announced yet. So that's an interesting factor as well. But for the Chargers, again, a guy you don't want to see leave the building. So that's interesting. As for the players who were not franchise tagged, this is obviously not every player that wasn't franchise tagged. That'd be a very long list. But the notable ones, Harold Landry, a lot thought might be tagged. And he's almost the guy you put that franchise tag in for, of kind of an edge rusher who has this good season on a contract year. Maybe give him one extra chance to, one more year to really get an extension and see how good he is. But Titans decide not to. There's an interesting debate with him of Harold Landry's stats are very good, but I think there's a lot of people who feel like his tape doesn't match up those stats, doesn't match up the production. So that'll be a fascinating situation. How much money does he get? And then you have some corners. J.C. Jackson, who I think a lot of Patriots fans are disappointed does not get the franchise tag. Carlton Davis for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, another good corner. Basically, you can only tag one guy, so they tagged Godwin instead of Davis. Davis, I think that was someone they considered maybe they would tag, but now he hits the open market. Marcus Williams, who was tagged last year, and also Teron Armstead, a couple of New Orleans Saints players now. Who, listen, they tagged someone last year when they were $100 million over the cap, so they could have tried to make it work again. Do not, though. And also, again, Tyrann Mathieu, because you tag Orlando Brown Jr., can only tag one guy. So, yeah, I think it's interesting stuff. So, as a whole, wild week and, well, not even a week, wild a couple of days. What's crazy is when I was making this video, I was thinking, okay, what are all the things we have to talk about? And I'm like, okay, have I gotten everything? And I'm like, no, I haven't. I forgot Aaron Rodgers going to the Packers. That was the last thing I put in my notes before the video. Somehow, this has been such a crazy 24 hours, I completely even forgot that happened. So, wild 24 hours, and it's only going to get more wild. We're on the 14th. That's when legal tampering begins. The legal tampering period begins, meaning we will know who is going where. We will at least start to know which free agents are signing where. That's always a blast. Free agency is right around the corner here, and one of the more fun times in the off season. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you thought about any of these topics in the comments below. Always love hearing from you, and of course, as always, thanks for watching.